Hello, and welcome to episode 41 of My Dog Will Eat My Face. In this episode, I want to give a generalized health update for mainly my friends and family that tune into this podcast. But if you're a stranger, I guess, don't be a stranger, and you can listen into the health update as well. It's basically just going to summarize, unfortunately, the worsening of my condition, which is not unexpected. But I'll give further details later on in this episode. I also want to touch on a pretty significant scare for me that happened. I think I talked about it one or two episodes back where I'd fallen. And as I discussed the details of that particular incident with one of the attending nurses, I got some particular details that really got me thinking and got me worried about my condition overall, and made me think about my fears and how I'm going to mitigate them. I actually hopped online in a few Reddit groups and other places around where people discuss health and heart issues to discuss these fears and discuss these issues. And it actually turned into a pretty vibrant discussion in a few places, to where we openly discussed what we feared most as fellow heart failure sufferers. And what I found out was actually kind of interesting when I compare it to what my fears are. And I'll just share that just because I'm morbidly curious, and my guess is you might be morbidly curious too to see how other folks are taking their heart failure and what their fears are and how they're handling things. It actually came pretty similar to myself, so that was interesting. But I'll discuss that in more detail later in this episode. But with all that being said, let me go ahead and not delay any further and just go ahead and get started with the first part of this episode, number 41, where I want to give a quick health update for family and friends mainly again. But if you're just a listener, obviously this is for you too. It can actually teach you a little bit about what you might expect if you go into heart failure for a prolonged period of time, or if you have a family member who's suffering from heart failure and what they're going through. So I will start to touch on that here in a bit. So, in terms of a health update, there's nothing too surprising here. It's unfortunately following the same pattern that doctors warned me of so many years past. Essentially, it's just getting slowly worse and worse and worse. My oxygen levels are slowly depleting, and my edema in my legs and feet is increasing, which is excruciatingly painful. I don't know if you as a listener have had any experience with edema. That is just fluid swelling in your extremities, but it is very, very painful. And as I see it, your body is trying to put a little Freudian slip there. Your body is trying to put an excess amount of fluid into small capillaries and small blood vessels that are not made to handle that volume of fluid, and so it's applying pressure to all the nerves, and it's extremely painful. And unfortunately, painkillers don't do much to mitigate it. They don't do a lot because it's your body telling you that, hey, there's something seriously wrong here, and I'm not going to shut up until you stop it. So you have to be pretty much put under entirely with propofol or something in order for that pain to completely go away. So it's very rough to manage. And I'm on 18 liters of oxygen right now. So if I were to require more oxygen, unfortunately that would mean you had another oxygen compressor in the house, which would lead me up to 3 compressors just to keep me alive. And that would just be unbearable. These things are huge, they're noisy, they produce a ton of heat. They're just awful. It's not like a little tank. They're basically pieces of furniture you move into your place to convert room air to pure oxygen as best as it can. And I'm maxed out at the level I can go with 2 concentrators, which is what I have right now. And if I end up needing more oxygen, I would have to get a 3rd concentrator, and I don't even know where the heck I'd put it. So that's a real problem. And I can just see it slowly getting worse and worse. And with that, the edema, like I said, is getting worse. That's occurring because the heart can't pump the fluid as well as it is supposed to. All this derives from the weakening of the heart, unfortunately. And as the heart weakens, the fluid that it's trying to pump back to itself actually doesn't move. It kind of pools in extremities and wherever gravity takes it, so it tends to go towards the feet and the legs. And as I said, it's extraordinarily painful because you're trying to fit an enormous amount of fluid in a blood vessel or a series of vessels that are not made to hold that kind of blood. So that's a problem. And it's ongoing, and it's just getting worse, despite the fact that I'm on an elephant load of diuretics. And so, yeah, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. I've also had, I should share here, some other opportunistic infections hit me because my immune system is actually weakening. My body's struggling really hard to keep me alive, and it's weakening my ability to stage off disease. So I've had a few opportunistic infections that people don't normally get, unfortunately. And it's just going to get worse and worse. So, with that said, let me talk about an incident that occurred a little while back, I want to say about a week and a half ago, and give more detail to that. And with that incident, it kind of actually demonstrates what happens when your O2 levels drop like this. And it kind of demonstrates the battle that I'm fighting with this worsening condition. So, a perfect example of how my health has deteriorated is what I'm calling the chair incident. It sounds like the Gulf of Tonkin, doesn't it? In my case, it sort of is my Gulf of Tonkin incident. It was pretty bad. I know I touched on this earlier before, like I said, but let me give a further detailed description of what exactly happened. I was just sitting at my desk, merrily playing Civilization 6, and relaxing, goofing off, and I'm in a rolly office chair. It's got wheels on it. And stupid me, I was leaning back in the chair as I was playing the game. And I don't mean just sitting back with my back against the back of the chair. I mean, I was tilting back in it on the back wheel, which is incredibly stupid, granted. So I'm saying that this is all entirely my fault. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was me being stupid. So that's one thing. But what happened then is I actually had a fainting spell right when I was tilting back. And what happened is I fell backwards in the chair, and the chair did not only fall on top of me, it did a Looney Tunes style up in the air fall and landed back on top of me on the floor. So next thing I know, I feel this bash of my head against the floor on the hard ground, and then the damn chair flying back down and landing on top of me. In hindsight, I can laugh. At the time, as soon as this happened, all what I did was cry. That's all I could do was cry. And a general instruction under hospice care is if you fall, you're supposed to call them. They are there. They are your 911. When something happens, you have to call them, essentially. And so I did. I called them, and I was kind of hysterical. It was a total freak accident. I was freaked out. And I was crying still. And so they dispatched several nurses to me right away. After that, I don't remember anything. I blacked it all out. No, I wasn't like drinking or anything. I wasn't high. I wasn't doing anything crazy. I literally blacked out the rest of the evening. And I managed to talk to one of the attending nurses within this last week. And she gave me more details as to what happened. And how I was performing and behaving when they arrived. Essentially what she shared with me was that I was basically incoherent. I was talking nonsense, which I often do. I told her that's not new. You should listen to my podcast. I talk nonsense all the time. But no, in all seriousness, I was just babbling complete nonsense, disoriented, stumbling around, not knowing where I was. It's just creepy stuff. And they took my oxygen reading, and it was in the low 70s. And that is with 18 liters of oxygen sandblasting basically into my face. So on 18 liters of oxygen coming through on the cannula, I was registering in the low 70s percentage, which could cause cardiac arrest. So that was terrible, and there's nothing they could do to bring it up. They tried to get me to relax. It wouldn't come up. It kept teetering around the low 70s, high 60s. So it was pretty bad. So that could also account, though, for the stumbling and the nonsensical talk and things like that, because I had low oxygen. And that's really what this all could be attributed to, was I had severely low oxygen. But I guess it got so bad, they were thinking of calling the family. And what I mean when I say that is they're going to call my family and tell them they should arrive here soon because this could be the last thing I do. I could be going. This could be it. Because they couldn't bring my oxygen up. And so they were contemplating calling my dad, who's still alive, and my family in California. I did not know that at the time, or if I did, I've blacked it out. I totally don't remember anything, which is understandable. I bashed my head and I was not getting oxygen. But it was a lot worse than I thought it was, and it hit me with a strong sense of gravitas when this nurse told me the story. I didn't quite appreciate how bad it was, that they were considering calling the family to come visit, that this could be it. But lo and behold, my oxygen level did finally, at the last minute, start to come up and recover, and I just barely got by and just barely lived through it. But that's really scary to hear that they were about to call my family. It's happened once before in my life where I was in the hospital and they called family in. I was in the hospital for a sepsis infection. And I was pretty much delirious. I had a 104 to 106 degree fever. I was completely out of it from the fever. I was shaking. I was really struggling to stay alive. And with a full-blown sepsis infection, the mortality rate's about 50-50. So they did call my parents. At this time, my mom was still alive. And they came to the hospital to visit me, and I didn't expect them. It was kind of funny. I came to at one moment, and I saw someone was holding my hand, and I'm like, what the heck? And I kind of squint my eyes like, oh, hi, Mom. It was my mother. And she looked at me with the saddest look. I'm like, wait, what's going on? I didn't know, because I was just in such a delirious state. So I know that when they consider calling the family, it's a bad thing. I've actually made a request for my medical records to see what exactly happened that night, what led them to that conclusion, and get more details on it, and I'm awaiting their response. So if I get more details on the quote-unquote chair incident, I'll let you folks know. But that was very, very scary. It became more scary later when I learned that it was worse off than I originally thought. I was quite happy just blacking it out. Ignorance is bliss. So, I almost regret asking that one nurse. But anyway, we'll see what the medical record says, and then I'll maybe derive more information, maybe not. But that was really terrifying. And that made me take stock of my fears. You know, one of my biggest fears now that as I face this disease is what's going to happen with those who survive me. And this kind of actually came from a different conversation that I had online with someone, where I did share that I'm at peace with facing my death. And they said something along the lines of, I only hope your family and loved ones feel the same way. And I doubt they do. That's a big rock I haven't overturned. So, that's something I'm going to have to address. I'm not sure how. I've done all the right economic things. I've created a living will. It's very clear. I went through an attorney to do it. I have things divvied out to who should get what, so there's no arguments, no fighting when I'm gone. I fought vigorously to retain my life insurance policy when I lost my job, and I succeeded. Because that's important to me. I want my loved ones to be covered when I go. So, life insurance, check. Living will, check. The financial things are easy. I can fight for those. I can handle those. The only thing that I can also measure is a sense of me having been here. And honestly, that's going to be this podcast. My family will still have access to all these episodes. So at any given moment, they can pull up my voice and listen to me anytime once I'm gone. And I can't imagine the luxury that would be for someone who lost a loved one. But I still need to think about it some more. I think it's a concept that I've largely escaped, and I need to kind of correct. But then I began to wonder, is there anything else that I haven't addressed? So, using Reddit and other online groups that I go along to, I basically did a lackluster ad lib poll asking people what they're afraid of with heart failure. And the results are actually kind of interesting. And going forward in this next segment, I'd like to share what those are and how I measured up in comparison to what other folks are fearing with this same disease. So, with respect to this kind of ad hoc poll that I did, it wasn't scientific. It wasn't very methodical. I didn't record anything. It was just very amateur, if anything else. So, I don't put a lot of stock in it, but I was curious what other people were afraid of and how that stacks up to what I'm afraid of. And what I heard from others was very interesting. Absolutely no one in any group, anywhere, we're talking about hundreds of users now, no one said that they were afraid of death. We all think that that's something to be afraid of or something that we should be afraid of. I don't know. You don't ever want to shit on yourself. But for some reason, I assumed that would rank number one. But it was not even mentioned. They are not afraid of death. And that was amazing. That was shocking. And, it could be for any number of reasons. It could be because of their religion. It could be because of their logical standing. I don't know. I didn't get into the whys of anything, but for whatever it is, death was just never brought up. So that, first of all, was very interesting. And the results that were more ubiquitous than not are also interesting. Those items included fears of a reduction in quality of life, and fainting was a fear, and sudden death was a fear. So I guess sudden death, you could say that's fear of death. Okay, take back a little bit. But they weren't afraid of sudden death because of the death part. They were afraid of it because they couldn't face it in the face and couldn't challenge it and couldn't fight. The suddenness is what they feared, not the actual death. So let me clarify that. That's why I make that distinction. And those are by far a lot of what were originally my fears. Death, I've never been afraid of death, so I echo that entirely. I've never been afraid of actually being dead. To me, there's nothing there. It's going to be like the year 1812 to me, and I don't run around in fear of the war of 1812. It's going to be meaningless to me. I'll be dead, so I don't have anything to fear. But I do echo, heavily, their concerns with respect to quality of living. That's something that I've often opined on, in which I lament losing my quality of life. It is something that bothers me still. Being hooked up to oxygen 24/7, not able to go out, not able to travel, things like that, not seeing friends. Quality of life is definitely up there with me, and also, not to mention the pain and the suffering. The problem with heart failure is it's a how do I want to word it? It's a long, strung-out death. It's a long, painful demise. I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. And so quality of life really stinks when you're facing something like that. And that ranked almost ubiquitously amongst all my sources, that they were afeared. Wow, good English. They were afraid of their quality of life diminishing. Also, almost ubiquitous was fainting, which was interesting. Just fainting. Coming to afterwards, the suddenness of just going down scared them, and then, of course, not getting back up, that leading them to death. And what's funny is, with that, is I obviously faint quite a bit. I just described it as fainting spell that caused me significant injury. I also don't like the idea of sudden death, although if I had to pick my way of going, that's probably the one I'd pick. So I'm a little different in that regard. I don't want it to be long and drawn out, but it's already been long and drawn out. But I thought that was interesting, how their top fears mimicked in many ways what my top fears were, except for, I guess, the sudden death, suddenly dying. To me, that's the way to go. When I first joined hospice, they asked me, how do I want to die? Which was what I thought a weird question. And I said, I want to be sitting in a plane looking out the window and say out loud, should we be flying that close to the mountain? And that's it. Dead. Crashed into a mountaintop. So I've already said that I want a sudden death. I don't want a long, drawn-out death. So I guess I'm not that afraid of that. But they mean more in terms of fainting and not ever getting back up. And that's scary, too. I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want to be found in some certain horrible position with my fluids everywhere. God, I don't want that, obviously. And for the most part, though, they mimicked my fears. And I've tried to address each and one of those fears personally through this journey. Throughout this podcast series, I've addressed these fears. And I've tried to attack them one at a time and try to mitigate them. But what's sort of come as an epiphany to me lately is that I've not addressed the survivors. Like I said earlier in this podcast, I have not really fully addressed how the people who survive me will be. I don't know. On the financial side, I've really done well. I have a living will, like I said. I have life insurance, like I said. I've really attacked it from a financial standpoint. And I guess, in part, this podcast is a big part of that, because when I'm gone, my family can listen to my voice anytime they want. And that's just going to be my gift to them. I don't know what else to do to help mitigate what my family will go through, my loved ones, my friends will go through when I pass. That's something I've honestly not thought about heavily, except for the financial part. The financial part's easy. It's very easy. There's easy to-do lists to help support your family once you go. I think the podcast was a brilliant idea to journal through podcasting. Because as I said, once I'm long gone, this will still be out there and on the internet. It's going to be out there forever. Perhaps one day my grandniece and grandnephew will listen to this. But I don't know if that's enough. I feel like it's not. Because they're going to be stuck with the brunt of dealing with all the issues. The survivors are really the victims here, not me. They're going to be the ones that get the short end of the stick. So I sincerely have to reanalyze how I handle that and what I can do to mitigate that, if anything. So, that is my big epiphany as a result of this self-analysis and this poll, the pseudo-poll that I took, is that I've got to spend more brain power on considering my survivors. So perhaps there may be more on that topic to come. I hope so. Because I feel that where I'm at right now is a little lackluster. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think I've done a great job. Because I've done all those things, like for financials, and created the podcast. But I really need to think about it and be sure that I've done all I could do. I'm not sure of that right now, so I can't fully claim that. So, as I wrap up this week's podcast, I leave it with more work than not for myself, I think. I've not fully analyzed what I've done to support my family when I go away. And I don't even remember the name of the person who brought up the issue with me. But I certainly wish I thanked them right away, because that is a big rock I've not overturned yet. So I'm going to have to do some work on that. I'll just call it homework. I'm giving myself homework. Maybe I've done all I can do. But I want to be sure before I say that. I want to at least analyze it and look at it and really ponder on that question. Because I want to be damn sure whenever I do faint and maybe never get back up, that I'm fully prepared. And that includes support for my survivors, my loved ones who survived me. So that is my big takeaway from this week's podcast. Otherwise, though, it seems to me that with respect to the other more ubiquitous fears, I've actually addressed them as best as I could. Things like quality of life and fainting, these are things I've brought up. If nothing else, it was refreshing to hear other people lamenting the same condition and the same problems that I've complained about here in this podcast. Maybe I'm more human than I realize. And at least I know I'm certainly not alone in this struggle. There's lots of people like that out there. The problem is we're all hidden because we're in heart failure. We have to stay inside on oxygen. We can't congregate anywhere. Except online. So I guess that's useful for that. But anyway, I want to definitely thank you all for listening to this week's podcast and wish me luck with the chair, that it doesn't flip over and crush me again. Thank you for listening into that story and chiming in this week. I deeply do mean it. I highly appreciate all my listeners. Feel free to share with whomever you like. Don't forget to click on the follow button in whichever application you're listening to this podcast. And be sure to activate notifications so you're notified when a new podcast comes out. And if you're really cool, you can go to patreon.com/mydogwilleatmyface if you want to drop a little shekel for myself, since labor is never free. And with that, though, I do reiterate, as always, that more than anything, I appreciate your listenership and sharing this podcast with others. It does me wonders to get my voice heard, and it helps me to organize my thoughts and my issues, and to seek ways to find problems that are in the background, and hopefully then find ways to mitigate them. So, thank you again for listening. That's all for this week. So, auf Wiedersehen.